Alright, so this is going to be what if Deku had Bond's powers from Seven Deadly Sins. So with that being said, let's just roll the intro.
They took it to 10. Let me tell you how I come through with the 1-2, kicking shit like kung fu. Treat a bad bitch like she average. I'm a savage, little hoe, what you want do? I'm about cash if the wild fast. I'ma get that little nigga by any means.
So, before we start the what if, I got this idea from after I was one day I was like drawing, and I decided to draw Bond from Seven Deadly Sins. So I'll probably put a picture up here of my drawing that I did. But yeah, I got the idea because there's other like what ifs about mostly like sunshine that ability, and not really about Bond. There are a few, but most of the Seven Deadly Sins and My Hero like what ifs have to do with sunshine, like I said, but there are some that do other characters. So I decided to do Bond since he's one of my favorite characters in the show. So let's get into some of the abilities that Bond can do. So if you don't know Seven Deadly Sins, then it's basically the show about these kind of, I guess at the beginning they're like vigilantes. They used to work for this kingdom. They were the highest ranking of knights, and each of them possessed a special and unique magical power, and each of them kind of represented the sin that they had. So Bond was the sin of greed, and his power was Snatch. So this power can do a lot of things. Not only can it like steal physical objects, but it could also steal physical strength from people, and it could also steal someone's perception. Like so if Bond were to steal someone's perception, then he would be invisible to them. So I went on the wiki before this to check out some of the other stuff. Using things like Fox Hunt, he could use his staff, 3-section staff, which is kind of like what it sounds like. It's 3 sections of a staff connected by a chain, almost like nunchucks, but with a third one in the middle. So he could use this to take out organs, and he could basically do this without any. It doesn't really matter what's in the way. So yeah, he could also. I guess this part's a spoiler, so if you don't want to hear it, don't watch this video, I guess. But it's only a small one. It's only talking about one ability, and that's called the Gift, which is the opposite of Snatch, where he's actually able to give power in some of his life force. But since he's immortal, which is a big factor into this, he could give like unlimited amount of strength. At least that's what I've read from the wiki. So if I'm wrong about that, you could tell me, but I'm pretty sure it's right since it was on the wiki, and a lot of people contribute to that. So for like the physical strength stealing, I don't think he needs to have contact with them. I think he just has to be in the general area of them. He also has an AoE version of this where he takes the strength of every living creature within 100 feet. So I'm pretty sure he doesn't have to touch everything, right? And he also has let me think. He has the basics like superhuman strength and speed, and he has immortality and eternal youth. Because eternal youth and immortality are 2 separate things, technically, but he has both of them since he drank the fountain of youth, right? So in this what if, we're actually gonna give Deku all of his powers except for things like Gift, since he has to learn that later on, and Bond didn't know that at the beginning, that he could do things like that. So that's how we're gonna start the what if, right? So we get back to the point where Deku is actually in his at school right now, and Bakugo is telling him about his quirk, and before Deku could tell him about his, they are already like playing outside, and this is when Bakugo actually loses control of his powers, and actually gravely injures Deku. If Deku was a normal person, he would have died. But since he has that immortality, he would regenerate and become, alive again. So Bakugo at this age wouldn't really understand what's happening, and seeing his own friend basically die in front of his eyes and then come back later, only a few seconds later, would really mess him up mentally. But Deku would just be like, he'd be kind of annoyed, telling Bakugo like, why'd you do that? That really hurt. But Bakugo would be like, Deku, what's your quirk? And Deku would be like, well, my quirk is Undying Thief. I could steal pretty much anything, and I'm immortal. And Bakugo, being at a young age, would be like, what's immortal? And then Deku would be like, well, from what the doctors told me, it basically means I can't die. And Bakugo would have to take a second to kind of absorb all this knowledge, and I think Bakugo would become pretty reserved because of this incident, not knowing what to do, seeing that his powers were that almost killed a person. If Deku wasn't immortal, he probably would have killed a little kid. So as Deku grows up, I think his personality would be somewhat close to Bond's, but I think he'd be more trusting since he has his mother, which Bond did not have his parents. He only had the kind of werefox. I think he was a werefox. But yeah, so he'd be a little bit more trusting. I think he would be a little bit taller because since Deku has a immortal body, I think Deku would train a lot physically. So every time his muscle fibers would rip, they would just like regenerate, right? So he'd become a lot stronger since he doesn't have to wait in between his muscles to recover, right? So I think at this point, Deku would be around 100 times faster than a pro athlete and 100 times stronger as well. So I believe the fastest a person has ever ran would be Usain Bolt at 27.8 meters per hour. So we would have to times up by 100. And let's just round it to make it easier, since it was like 0.8. So it'd be like 2,800 meters per second. Or I think that was in miles, actually. Yeah, it was in miles. So 28,000 or 2,800 miles per hour is basically Mach 4. So that's 4 times the speed of sound. For like deadlifts and like just general strength. Let me see. So an average man can like lift 155, but we said pro athletes, so I don't know the exact amount. Let's just say it's like 200. So we would times 200 by 100, and you get 20,000. Yeah, 20,000. So you could lift 20,000 pounds, or around like if I would do the like conversions to my head. In my head, it'd be like over 41,000 kilograms, I believe. Oh wait, no, it's the opposite. It'd be like 10,000 or 11,000 kilograms, something like that. So he does get a little bit of like, the reason why he's so strong is because he has Bond's powers, right? And one of Bond's powers in general is like superhuman strength and speed. So yeah, and combine that with the explanation I gave earlier about how his muscle fibers would just keep on regenerating. So he would get tired, right? Because Bond still gets fatigued, especially when he uses like the physical hunt, which steals power from people, their physical strength, like that. So as Deku's growing up, he learns that he's actually able to do his like steal at a distance if he has something long enough to reach. So he kind of looks at different things that he could use to enhance this ability, and he would try things like a staff, and that wouldn't really work because it's not really flexible. And then he tries like a whip, and again, that's not really his style. So he kind of combines the two and makes a 3-section staff. And this gives him, enough flexibility with also being able to block things, right? So Deku has this kind of laid-back personality, kind of like Bon, but he doesn't really have that tragic backstory, really. And I would say that he's pretty popular in school because of this personality he has, and the fact that he could basically steal whatever he wants and not really get caught because it's hard to prove. And not only that, but he's laid back because he's immortal, and nothing can really like there's no really big consequences. The only consequence is that there's pain, right? So he would be a lot more confident. I think he would still be friends with Bakugo, but I don't think Bakugo would be the same personality that he has in the show. I think it'd be a lot more reserved in the way that he doesn't speak that much, and it's almost kind of like Todoroki in a way, but not as there's not that much malice in it. He's just really quiet and doesn't really want to use his quirk too often, and he doesn't really talk about it because of that event that that happened to him as a kid, right? And people kind of know what happened that day, but they don't really say anything about it since they're both friends and Deku's immortal, so they don't really care. So it gets to the day where the teacher says to the class, like, oh, looks like we have 2 people trying to get into UA. Katsuki Bakugo and Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. And Izuku would be kind of surprised, or Deku would be surprised that Bakugo would try to go into UA. And he would kind of put his arm around him and be like, hey man, I'm really proud. Looks like you're finally getting over your past. I hope you could become a great hero. And this would kind of cheer up Bakugo a bit, because all of his life he still had this like kind of guilt in him because of what happened. Bakugo would tell Deku, like, thanks Izuku, I really needed that, because at this point Bakugo was kind of doubting himself if he could become a hero. But with the encouragement of Izuku or Midoriya or Deku, he kind of gets over this a little bit. So we get to the end of the day, and Deku's actually going home, but he decides to go a different route than usual. He tries to go for a shortcut, and this is when the sludge villain actually attacks. So at this point, Deku would be way too fast for him. I don't think he would be strong enough to do any shockwaves. He might be able to, but not as powerful as someone like All Might. But he'd be able to make some small shockwaves, right? And he could just take his physical strength. So the sludge villain would be a lot slower and a lot weaker, and this would give enough with Deku using his snatch ability to become stronger with his physical hunt. He would be easily be able to subdue the villain. And this is when All Might comes through saying, I am here. And he'd be like, whoa, kid, you took down this villain all by yourself? And he'd be like, oh. He would be a fanboy still, so he'd be like, oh my gosh, it's All Might. Oh, and he's like, oh, hey, kid. And he would be like, you want an autograph? And Deku would take out his like notebook and like, yes, please. And this is when All Might would sign it. And as he's like signing it, he's like, hey kid, what's your quirk? And then he would basically say, My quirk is called Undying Thief. I could snatch pretty much anything, and I'm basically immortal. And hearing this, he'd be like, wow. And he would also have this kind of feeling in the back of his mind, like, I'm so glad All For One is not alive, or else this kid would be a pretty big target, right? At this point, he doesn't know that All For One is alive. So he'd basically say, well, kid, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I gotta take this villain to the authorities, so I'll be leaving for now. And this is when All Might basically puts the villain into the soda bottles, and Deku doesn't really attach to himself because he knows he could be a hero and he has a quirk that's pretty strong. So that wouldn't really happen. So Deku, for the training that he does, he would be doing like some physical training, but he would also try to do some things with more of his quirk. Like he would try to do like a less advanced version of Fox Hunt, which is the move where he takes out the hearts of like people, right? He would do something similar, but obviously he wouldn't want to make it lethal. He would have two versions of this, one where it's not as lethal and the other one where it would be. So he also has other moves that he learns. Like, I forgot what it's called, but it's the one where Bond just like runs through a pack of enemies and their heads kind of just get like chopped off. And yeah, so he would learn how to do this, and I think eventually he would learn how to do a hunter fest, which is basically the physical hunt but AoE. So this would drastically like make him stronger, right? For the day of the exam, when Deku actually goes to UA, I don't think he would trip, but I still think he would still meet Uraraka just on his way there. He would just say, oh hey, are you trying to be a hero as well? You know, they would just kind of bump into each other, right? And Uraraka would be like, yeah, I'm trying to get into UA to become a hero. And Deku would be like, oh, so you're just like the rest of us, since so many people are trying to do that. So for the written exam, I don't think Deku would do any worse than he does in canon, so he would do around the same. And for the so they would basically get to the point where they're at the, I think it's called the practical exam, or the one where they're outside with the robots. So Deku would actually do pretty well. He would have his like 3-section staff, because I think equipment would be allowed, since that belly button laser kind of thing was allowed, the belt that he has for it. So he would be able to use this as well. So he would just go around using his Fox Hunt to basically use his staff to kind of steal the power sources of these robots, so it would count as a defeat. So he would rack up points pretty fast. So they would get to the point where there would be a scream and people running away, and this is when the 0 point robot actually comes through. And what happens is that everyone's running the opposite direction from the scream, so Deku decides to run towards it to see if he can save anyone that's there. And then this is when he sees Uraraka, which Uraraka or Ochako, and he's like, oh, she's like stuck under some rubble. So, and he sees the 0 point robot, so he doesn't have that much time. So what he does is he uses his Hunter Fest to kind of take the physical strength of a lot of people in the area, which is 100 feet. He takes their strength and he actually does something similar to what he does in canon, but he doesn't break his legs, right? And the robots kind of like broken, but it's still upright. So he goes to Uraraka and kind of frees her and says, wow, that could have been bad. Good thing I was here to stop you, or stop the robot. And this is when Uraraka would, thank Deku for saving her. And I think this would be a point where a piece of the robot would just fall onto Deku, doing a big splat on the ground. And Uraraka would be, she would be lost for words because she just saw someone get crushed. And then a few seconds later, Deku would just appear and be like he would be touching his neck as if he had a knot in it, and be like, damn, I didn't see that one coming. And he would be kind of shirtless because how he regenerated. And this is when Uraraka would see all of his muscles. And I think Deku, like I said before, will be a little bit taller and he'd be more confident because he has a quirk. So she would kind of be flustered by this, but at the same time be confused because she just saw someone almost die. So Deku Uraraka would be like, what's your power, Midoriya? Because they would have exchanged names, but they're not on a first name basis. So basically what Deku would be like, oh yeah, I didn't mention this, but I'm immortal. And Uraraka would be like, what? How is that even possible? And then this is when the test would be over and Recovery Girl would come to kind of kiss Uraraka to kind of heal her. And for the next part, or let's just get through this real quick. So for Deku, I think you'd get the top score. Bakugo would get second because around the first time in his life he's been able to use his quirk at his max without hurting anyone, and these are robots, so it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I think that Deku would get first, and then Bakugo would get second. And Uraraka would kind of develop feelings for Deku a little bit earlier on. So we get we would it'd be a few hours later, and Deku would be home and kind of at his computer. And this is when his mom actually comes through his room and gives him the letter, and she says it's from UA. Deku opens it up, and it's a projection of All Might, and he basically says that you are the one who got the top score, and you even got some hero points. So good for you. We're gonna see you at UA next week. So good luck, and I hope you become a great hero. And Deku would kind of smirk and be like, yeah, I know. Because he's a lot more confident. Somewhat, I would say he has a Bond kind of personality, but not as, he's more trusting and more caring, I guess. Not caring, but he doesn't have that tragic backstory, right? So I think I'll end it here, and in the next part we'll go through the quirk assessments and the hero the hero versus villain test. So with that being said, this is going to be the end of the video. So yeah,